Hi, welcome to the Coffee Channel. I am JP and joining me today is Adam Pereira, coffee aficionado, and we're going to be tasting some of Gardelli's top rated coffees. So these are the ones that score 90 plus points in their own rating system. So we've got a La Aurora, which is a red anaerobic micro lot from Ecuador. We've got Duancho, that's a natural Ethiopian. We've got Mzungo, which is an unusual Ugandan coffee that Gardelli has as a unique exclusive lot. Rubens works very closely with the farmer on this particular lot. And finally, we got a very special geisha from Panama. It's a slightly older coffee, so it'll be interesting to see whether this will still taste good. We're going to be tasting them as AeroPresses. I think this is like the best method to really get what this coffee's about. It's not so intense as espresso. Flavours become a bit more apparent, and it's a bit easier to dial in when you're drinking all of these. Okay, so firstly we're going to start off with the La Aurora.
Sure.
Right.
Really glad to be here. Really excited about this. Big fan of the AeroPress.
Yeah,
really...
I mean, you have a rather unusual recipe, don't you, for your AeroPresses, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, I do actually. One of my friends is a coffee aficionado, and he's been making coffee for years and working in the coffee industry. He sort of helped me come up with a recipe for making an espresso out of the AeroPress. And it works quite well. We brew it in inverted method, a few minutes at a time, and yeah. But I know that its real forte is obviously as a filter, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you run it quite short, don't you? You run quite, if I remember correctly, you grind the coffee quite coarse.
That's correct, yeah.
Compared to how I grind it,
yes.
and you run quite a short coffee. So typically I'd run an AeroPress with, well, how I'm going to make it today I'm going to put about 13 grams of coffee in, and I'm going to put about 210 grams of water.
Okay.
Just below boiling. I'm going to do a minute 15 extraction. Then I'm going to do about 30 seconds turned over and pushing it down.
It's a very quick extraction, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah. So I grind quite fine, actually.
Yeah.
It's just my own preference, I guess. There
Sure.
are different ways of making it. I think one of the things about AeroPresses is there's lots of different ways you can get a decent result.
That's right.
And there's not one thing that's right.
Yes.
So if you look at like the UK AeroPress Championship and the World AeroPress Championships, there's all sorts of funny different techniques that people use.
Right.
Okay, so we're using the inverted method. I'm going to just pour it in pretty quickly. And start the timer now.
30 seconds, did you say?
So 30 seconds of actual extraction, so the actual bit where you push
push it through. So how long will it brew for?
1 minute 45 altogether.
What's the temperature of that water?
Just below boiling. So ideally I think you want about 94, but
94.
with a kettle it's hard to get that consistent.
I mean, what do you recommend to our viewers, like in terms of the temperature of the water? What's the best way of telling?
Well, I go for just below boiling, basically, because that's the best way to get consistency.
Okay, I see. So can you do that by ear or?
Well, just wait till your kettle's totally boiled.
Yeah.
And then use it straight away. It's not going to burn the coffee. That's kind of an old school sort of myth. Really.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. It doesn't burn the coffee. You can put it in 100. It'll be absolutely fine.
I didn't know that.
It's a little bit hot, but you're better off having consistency.
Sure, in the consistency in the temperature.
Yeah, than you are in having it a few degrees difference, from the start. Right, okay, we're nearly there for this one. Let's get a couple of cups out. And we'll turn over.
Love this bit. This is a really good bit.
You know what, I was making 2 of these AeroPresses in my old shop years ago for an England rugby player and his wife, and as I did that turnover, I did it on 2, one after the other, and they both fell apart, and the coffee went absolutely everywhere. And it's one of those situations where
amazing.
Yeah, when you've got a liquid in an area like this, it doesn't look like much liquid at all, does it?
No, it doesn't.
But when you put it on a flat surface, the whole coffee shop was flooded. It was like some sort of dirty protest. But there you go. Right. Okay. So I generally, once you start to hear that kind of hissing sound at the bottom of your extraction there, that's when you want to stop, because then you're sort of extracting undesirable oils from your coffee. Right.
Oh, that's an interesting tip.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't know.
Yeah. So you always stop at that point.
So you don't push too hard.
No, don't push too hard at the very end. As
The
soon as you
very
hear that
end.
hissing noise, that's when to finish. Now we're going to be super caffeinated here.
That's fine. I've kept coffee free all day in anticipation of tasting your delicious wares.
I've had a single shot espresso this morning. That's it. So,
Clean to
but I
know.
still think. Now, one thing when I had my shop, I used to give my customers rather pretentiously a temperature gun when I gave them an AeroPress or a filter coffee, because I think it's really important you don't drink it too soon. So I gave them this infrared temperature gun. You point at the coffee and make sure you drink it below 55, and you think, does that really matter? But the interesting thing is, it does make a big difference to the taste, because if you drink it when it's too hot, it tends to taste over-extracted. I don't know why this is. Someone may be able to come in with some of the science behind this. I've never seen an explanation of it. But there's certainly a kind of a very bittery sort of taste if it's a bit too hot. And then that kind of ruins the rest of the coffee for you.
Is that the case with just filter or an espresso, or is it the same in milk as well?
I think it's the same with espresso. With milk, you shouldn't get it, because
okay.
if you texture the milk over 55, it's going to taste pretty bad anyway.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah, so if 55 is probably about the point where milk is going to be too hot,
right.
and it's not going to taste good anyway. So you probably wouldn't notice it with that, because you'd be thinking this tastes a bit sour because it's too hot, or you'd be burning your tongue on the milk. So it does seem to be the case.
Where were these beans grown again?
Okay, so this is an Ecuadorian coffee. What have we got? Okay, so we've got. It's not actually that high. Altitude 1,450 meters. So it's lower than you'd expect, but it's a carbonic maceration process. If I remember correctly, this should give it sort of more fruity sort of flavours, a bit like a natural coffee, but a bit cleaner than a natural coffee. So without some of those, without some of the maybe dirty flavours you sometimes get with a natural coffee.
Because naturals tend to be quite funky, I've found.
Yeah.
You know, so you're saying that with this particular procedure, it's going to be probably a little bit less.
Yeah, exactly.
Extreme,
We should get a bit less, a bit less of that funkiness, bit cleaner tasting, bit less possibility of getting those sort of undesirable, earthy, sort of dirty flavours. Right, let's see.
I mean, just my initial sort of impression, just from the smell, is it's quite like a spicy aroma, almost.
Yeah, there is a bit of spice there.
I was getting almost like a spice cupboard, sort of spice rack, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of tasting notes there are sort of herbal flavours, aren't they? Sort of lavender, rosemary.
Sure.
And whilst I'm not always convinced that tasting notes are that accurate, especially when you're talking, you've got different waters, you've got different brewing methods, all sorts of things like that. I think there's definitely that kind of hint of lavender on the nose. And we've got that kind of for me, it's a plumminess. I always think that
it's definitely there's a plum, there's a stone fruit sort of taste in there. It's an incredibly rounded flavour, I would say. I can't personally. I'm getting absolutely no bitterness in the.
It's very sweet actually.
Note.
Yeah, very
it's a
sweet.
very very sweet coffee. I'm getting sort of like a fennelly sort of like aftertaste at the very end. So it's definitely quite a few dimensions, isn't there?
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the things we're looking at and we're looking for in these kind of coffees. Yeah. You're looking for what are you getting when you pay more for a coffee like this?
Yeah.
What you're getting is you're getting more complexity. So it's not dissimilar to wine. You buy, if you buy a supermarket wine for £10 from Australia, it's going to be fairly upfront. It's going to have some nice flavours in it. It'll be fruity, but it might not have a great deal of complexity.
No, that's completely true.
That's what you get with cheaper coffees.
Absolutely.
If you even a specialty, say Brazilian general sort of specialty coffee, maybe an 85-point scoring Brazilian coffee, it's going to be chocolate, it's going to be nutty, but there won't be a lot more there than that. Whereas what you're looking for in these more expensive coffees is a large number of flavours that all kind of balance with each other, so not overpowering.
I mean, with this particular coffee, I'm definitely getting the best of natural with the kind of the cleanness of a washed coffee. It seems somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Almost. It's like, you've got those rather unusual tasting notes, like I say, spice, sort of fennel.
Yeah.
But unbelievably sweet, which is very, very unusual.
Yeah, very sweet. Excellent coffee. It's not cheap, unfortunately. It's from memory. I think it retails around the £30 mark for a bag. Possibly a little bit less, but it's not a cheap coffee. But
No.
you do get what you pay for, and the great thing about Gardelli coffees is they're omni roasted. So you know, what that means is they're roasted for the same for filter and espresso. Now some people argue that doesn't work. You need a darker coffee for espresso than you do for filter because it's a sort of harsher process, harder to extract. Therefore, it needs a bit more solubility than you get from a darker roast. And generally, I'd agree with them because every other omni roasted coffee I've had from quite a few roasters, some of whom will remain nameless, have either been too dark for filter or too light for espresso. So they usually work as one or the other.
Right.
They don't work as both. Whereas the Gardellis I've always found absolutely brilliant.
A complete solution, really. So I guess if you've got different drinkers in the house,
Yeah.
who one likes to have espresso, one likes to have filter, one likes it with milk, then it's actually a good answer all round, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of roasters who do omni roast would argue that there's a perfect roast for the coffee. And it doesn't need to vary from filter to espresso. The jury's still out on it, but certainly Rubens does an amazing job with his coffees. I've never had a problem with an espresso that I couldn't extract. Sometimes I have to grind really fine with the Gardelli coffees for espresso, but I've never had a filter run one of these as a filter and it's been too dark. So he's definitely getting it pretty good.
And that's one thing I'll definitely say about that one. It wasn't particularly heavy either. You know, it's just
nice and
light to medium sort of weight, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Very impressive stuff.
Okay, so we're on to the second coffee now. This is Duancho. It's an Ethiopian. It's classic natural, so typical of Ethiopian from that Sidama region. You've probably had lots of these before.
I actually have, yes.
In fact, I think you've had.
I've had that particular one before. It's one of my favourite coffees, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just open up the bag here and have a little smell, actually, before we start brewing. Oh gosh, such a wide range of smells.
Yeah.
You know, there's the typical chocolate in there, but actually, the thing that it reminds me most of is sort of a bag of opal fruits, or maybe even Skittles.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fruit in there.
Unbelievable. I would say that's in terms of the flavour, the smell profile, that's a lot more complex than the La Chorora.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't know, what do you smell when you smell that?
Yeah, I think it's got some of those classic natural flavours and aromas that you get. So obviously, I'm sure most of you know that a natural coffee is processed differently from washed coffee. So the actual coffee cherries are left to dry in the sun on raised patios.
Yeah.
Typically in places like Ethiopia, you'll get more natural coffees than South America.
Why is that? Is that to do
It's kind of a traditional thing, really. I mean,
Right.
it's a good way to process coffee without using large amounts of water, which obviously isn't always in abundance in African countries.
Sure.
African farmers tend to be smallholders. So, for example, this region of Ethiopia, this coffee, for example, would come from an area that wouldn't be dissimilar from where this came from in terms of the actual acreage.
Right.
But whereas this farm would be owned by one person, it might be, say, 40 hectares or whatever, I don't know. This would be 40 hectares owned by lots of different people.
I see, okay.
So with Ethiopian coffees, you rarely get a variety. It will just say heirloom because they don't know. It'll be wild varieties. They don't know what the varieties are. It's so many different farmers.
Sure.
And all take their coffee, their cherries to the to a processing plant, a mill, and then that's where the name of the coffee will come from. The actual mill, rather than. Whereas South American coffees and Central American coffees tend to be, not always, but often one large landowner who owns the whole farm of several hectares. Whereas Ethiopian would be lots of little small ones. It's not dissimilar to sort of the way Burgundy coffees worked, where Burgundy wines worked rather compared to Bordeaux. So whereas Bordeaux wines come from chateaus and generally speaking the best ones, and they practice primogeniture, so the aristocrats pass the chateaus and their vineyards down to the eldest son, usually eldest son. There wasn't much in the way of
Is that
sort of
right?
equality.
Okay.
So the vineyard would always stay as one big vineyard. In Burgundy, the vineyards were originally quite big, probably as big as the Bordeaux Chateau vineyards, but they would be they were owned by the church, and after they got rid of the church in France around sort of the Revolution, Napoleonic time, got rid of the power of the church, they split up the vineyards and gave them to peasants effectively. And the peasants would then pass their parcel of land to all their children equally. So then they get split up into a smaller lot, and smaller and smaller and smaller, which is why you've got incredibly small vineyards in Burgundy.
Right.
So Ethiopia's a little bit like that, not for the same reasons, but if you imagine South America is a bit more like Bordeaux.
Sure.
With big farms mainly, and a lot of Africa. Maybe not Kenya so much, but certainly Ethiopia, Rwanda.
You end up
very
these
small.
smaller farmers and the kind of special, more, I guess, variety in the different kind of coffees they end up with.
So really, the interesting thing is Ethiopia probably has the best growing conditions for coffee of any place in the world, but there's a little bit less consistency there because we don't always know what the coffee plants are, and different farmers might have slightly different techniques for growing them, and so maybe the consistency is a bit less than where you've got one person controlling a whole farm and doing the same thing. But it's interesting, it gives a bit of variety, I suppose.
It's interesting knowing where our coffees come from, because often with cheaper coffees or supermarket coffees, you don't tend to know exactly where they've come from, do you? So I think the stories behind these kind of coffees that you're kind of elaborating on here make it really interesting. So I noticed the extraction with that particular one, it was a little bit tougher, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know why. I ground it actually a bit coarser. The reason you grind Ethiopian coffees, I don't know the reason for this, because they're grown at quite high altitude usually. I mean, that one is at 2,100 to 2,200 metres. That's higher than any mountain in the UK.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
By quite a substantial margin. But Ethiopian coffees always, normally coffees that are grown very high are denser, the beans are denser. So it means that you have to grind them finer because they're less soluble because they're dense.
I see.
But Ethiopian coffees, for some reason, I don't know, again, it's something I just don't know. I've never seen any research that suggests why this is the case. Ethiopian coffees do seem to require a coarser grind.
A coarser grind. Interesting.
For a given height. So usually when you look at a coffee, if you look at the altitude, you usually get a good idea of most coffees how fine you're going to grind from the altitude. So if it's like Colombia and it's 2,000 metres, you're going to be right at the kind of finest range you grind at. Whereas if it's a Brazilian coffee and it's sort of like they're usually growing a bit lower, maybe 1,500 metres, maybe even lower than that, it's going to be much coarser.
Yeah, right.
It's much less dense.
I see.
But with Ethiopian coffees, it doesn't seem to follow that at all.
It doesn't seem to follow the rule.
Yeah,
How fascinating.
Not sure why.
Okay.
Right, so we're looking for typical flavours of a natural. I think I was describing what a natural was, but I think we got a bit sidetracked. So you know what a natural is, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess they're beans that are left to naturally ferment, aren't they, in the sun with the stone in?
Yeah,
is that correct? So it's like in terms of like the time it takes. It's like a natural, as the word would suggest.
Yeah,
it's a natural kind of fermentation.
Yeah, then the mucilage is pulled off at a later date,
rather
than being put in big vats and washed, which is your wash process coffee. I mean, the interesting thing is that natural coffees were regarded, until specialty coffee came along, maybe like 20 years ago, natural coffees were kind of thought of as being like dirty coffees that no one was really interested in. They're the cheap end of the market.
Now it's literally flipped round.
Flipped round actually.
Yeah, because from what I found, people that I know who are into coffee tend to kind of shy away from natural coffees because they find them too unusual. It's not this kind of standard coffee experience, but specialists or people who really tend to take their coffee super seriously appreciate and understand like the complexity of a natural, I think, and the unusualness of it.
Yeah. So I think it fitted in quite well with the specialty ethos of being something that's very different from what you had before.
That's correct.
So some roasters don't like them so much because there's more chance of them having as we talked about earlier, undesirable flavours.
Yeah, that's right.
Because obviously if they're not turned, if the cherries aren't turned quickly, they can grow mould on them, and you can get nasty flavours in there. So it's very much a sort of a game of two halves in a way. You gain some things and you lose some things, but if it's done well, you can get some really good results.
I mean, that is significantly different flavour profile from the
Yeah.
La Chorora that we had earlier, which tasted almost silky, the La Chorora. This is much more of a... There's more base notes in this, I'm finding. It's more of like a darker... Would you say it's a darker coffee?
Yeah, it feels a bit darker. I don't think it's
Yeah.
a darker roast, but it's got more of a like slightly heavier feel.
Much heavier, agreed.
I think that's one of the things that I didn't mention earlier that you're right to pick up on. That's got that silky texture that you get with often get with geishas and Panama coffees.
Yes.
It's a bit like you get it with to bore you with wine again. You get it with very expensive Bordeaux wines. It's kind of silky mouthfeel.
Absolutely.
Not quite got it with the Dewancha. I mean,
No.
it's a cheaper coffee. I think it's about...
The thing that surprised
20
me
quid.
is the flavour notes are quite different from the smelling notes that I was getting. I'm not really finding much sweetness in there as well. I'm finding quite a bitter finish actually. It's heavy, it's bitter, but it's actually more of a traditional tasting coffee.
Yeah.
Which is unusual because it's natural.
Yeah.
So I'm finding it tastes more like a sort of normal washed coffee.
Yeah, it's not got as much punch as the other one.
No.
But then, it is a cheaper coffee, I guess. So, it's interesting.
I think it's a coffee that would work quite well in milk actually.
Yeah, we run that quite a lot in milk. So in
Yeah.
milk, a natural coffee often gives you like this cheesecakey flavour.
That's correct, yes.
When you run it, it's like espresso.
Kind of just, it brings out certain flavour notes that you don't necessarily get when it's just
Yeah.
on its own. I mean, there is definitely a tropical fruit sort of note in there.
Yeah. So we've
somewhere
got
in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
I think there's like that peachy flavour. You know when you like peach juice when you
correct.
when you eat a really sort of ripe peach and you've got a juice and it's not
Mm-hmm.
totally sweet, is it? It is
No.
sweet, but there's that acidity there as well. But it's not like a strong acidity like a grapefruit.
No, that's true.
It's more of a subtle sort of acidity.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, to be honest, on its own, I think that would taste like a great coffee. I think probably in this order, we might have been better doing it the other way round.
Sure.
we went for the most expensive one first. Although,
Start with best.
to be fair, we have got
yeah.
this one at the end, but
That's true.
that is an older coffee.
Can we just talk a little bit about the AeroPress? In your opinion, what are the best filters for the AeroPress? Because I know I've seen a lot of options on the market. You can get metal ones, paper ones. I've been told that the metal filter can sort of impart like a slightly strange taste and alter the coffee. What's your take on that?
I've been using metal ones actually.
Oh, okay.
So years
Fair
ago, and this is a metal one. I think
Yeah.
I've used various sorts over the years. I use paper ones in my shop, and then I got this particular filter. It's an IMS one. Needs a bit of a clean there really.
Yeah, right.
That's an IMS one. They're a company that make filter baskets for espresso machines. Is one of the things they make. Quite like VST, quite high quality ones. It's like a guaranteed micron thickness.
I see.
The holes are a guaranteed size. So you can get cheaper ones, but this is actually quite expensive. It's about, I think it's about 25 quid. So
It's not too bad though if you're using it
not
every
not too
day.
bad if you're using it again and again and again.
Yeah.
Obviously, you never run out of
No.
filters. You want to make sure you wash it out basically because
Right.
you get oils from the coffee in there.
I see.
But I tested this there's a coffee website I used to write for called Perfect Daily Grind. People probably heard of it. I did a review of this filter
I see.
and a few others, and I found that was the best one.
So in your opinion, is it the consistency of the holes?
Yeah, it's the size of them. It has to be right as well.
So versus paper, it's more of a consistent.
I think that there's no noticeable difference between this and paper.
Right.
You don't get the problem with the papery taste. There's no real advantage in taste with it.
Well, it's eco-friendly as well, right? You're not
Yeah.
into-
You're not using. You don't. You can sometimes get a bit of a papery taste from the paper
Sure.
filters.
Yeah.
The holes are fine enough so that you don't end up with a brew that's kind of a bit full of like very fine
Very
grounds,
fine grounds, which is never pleasant, really.
which you can get with other meta filters.
I
Some of the
see.
ones that I tried didn't filter it that well.
Because if you're having it as a filter, generally you want it to be as clean and smooth.
Yeah.
It's a smooth drink, isn't
Yeah.
it? What are the other variables with the AeroPress then that you can kind of?
Okay, so what you've got basically, the main thing you want to keep consistent is your pressure down because you're pushing the coffee through the filter. So you want
Right.
to do that. You want to keep that the same every time.
I
So
see.
I usually aim for 30 seconds with that. The inverted method.
What are the benefits and cons, of the inverted versus the normal method? And...
Well, the inverted method. The problem with the normal method is you end up getting little drips of coffee
Sure.
coming out
before you've
you've actually brewed. That's the main reason you go for it that way, for the inverted method.
Right.
There are some other, I've seen people put forward other suggestions to why that way is better, but really this is the most practical way. It's the way most coffee shops run it, actually. So I think you're not going to make a massive difference. I think perhaps with filter coffee, people maybe focus too much on little details.
Sure.
So I think your most important thing is your grind, your water temperature, and your coffee. The other things are going to make very little difference. So I remember the UK Cup Tasters Cup champion a few years ago, a guy called Jason, who used to work at Kelowna and Smalls. I remember him saying in one of his blogs that he runs a coffee shop actually in Vermont, I think now, called Onyx. Yeah, so there's a shout out if you're ever in Vermont. Go to Onyx.
Go to Jason.
It does look amazing. He's a very good barista, but he won the UK Cup Tasters Cup, which is basically, and he went to the World Championships, and it's basically identifying coffees from tasting. So you have to identify which one's the odd one out from 3 coffees, and there are various other aspects to it. So he had an amazing palate. Yeah, he's really, really good.
Yeah.
I remember him saying years ago he couldn't tell the difference, even with his palate, between certain methods of making the coffee. So if someone made an AeroPress and they made him something with a clever dripper, for example, which is an immersion brewer, not dissimilar from a pour over, but you pour all the water in at once, and it's an immersion brew. He didn't think he could tell the difference between those two. If someone made it with the same coffee, same water temperature, same water, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference if he did a blind tasting. So I think sometimes people focus too much on like the little details, get the big things right.
Yes.
Your difference between this and brewing methods probably make about 5% difference, maybe.
Gosh, really that little. Yeah. I guess it becomes about brand affiliation ultimately. People become attached to certain brands, don't they? And I think that's kind of what.
I think people also like that sort of the whole sort of ritual.
The ritual, yeah.
It's like I was in Watch House in London at the weekend.
Oh, did you go to the Watch House?
Yeah,
what was that
Watch House. Yeah, it's very good, but there's a massive queue.
How big was the queue?
We're talking that both my wife and daughter were shouting at me. It was that big. It was half an hour.
Yeah.
Half an hour wait before we got anywhere near the place. It was lunchtime, but I thought it was down in Tower Hill. I thought this is the middle of nowhere. We've got to be all right going down here. But no, it was absolutely rammed. And
worth it for coffee though. Good coffee as well. What coffee do they run there?
They were running. I was surprised. I thought they roasted their own, but I had fried hats as a filter there.
Oh,
it was excellent. But they were pouring with V60s, and like V60s to me, that's what I use at home because I just like the wankiness of it really. Just pouring there like the little blue. But actually, it's not a very consistent method to use in a coffee shop.
I don't think so, no.
And you're paying someone effectively to stand there pouring for 3 minutes, however long it takes them to do all the pouring.
Yeah.
So I was surprised they're doing that technique. I will say though, the coffee was excellent. It's from Fried Hats in Fried Hat in Amsterdam, I think.
Fried Hat.
Yeah, and they're the ones who produce the coffe's in a little bottle, like almost like a pharmacy bottle. It was excellent. It was the best filters I've had in the last year or so. So I would say if you're after a really good coffee, they are good there.
So what have we got here, Jonathan?
Okay, so this is Mizingo. Now this is quite a special coffee because Rubens has this as an exclusive lot. It's Ugandan coffee.
I see.
Don't think I've ever had any other coffees from Uganda that haven't been this.
Oh right, is that true?
So the interesting thing about it is I think it uses his own natural process. So if you look at the process on the back there. It should say Gardelli.
Gardelli natural. So what's the difference between a traditional natural process and the one that Rubens has developed? Then?
Do you know what? I don't think he has divulged that information.
He's not divulged, right. Do you have any suspicions about what it could be? Temperature?
I suspect it might be more to do with consistency.
Oh, I see.
Not in terms of how quickly the cherries are turned and whether they're raised and what happens when you get the mucilage off. Of course, one thing worth pointing out, there's a couple of other methods sit between washed coffee. We talked about carbonic maceration, but there are a couple of other methods that sort of sit, and there's one called honey.
Honey, I've heard of this.
You heard of honey, yeah. Do you know what it is?
I've not actually. I don't really like the honey coffees I've had that much. I mean, what's your take on honey?
Okay, so basically there's a sort of range of honey processes, and it's like a natural process.
Yeah.
But you take off some of the mucilage or the skin of the cherry. So, and the different versions have different colours.
It's almost like you're controlling the fermentation or the natural sort of fermentation.
Yeah.
So is that to prevent the moulding that you were talking about?
Yeah, and it's also to try and reduce some of the natural flavours in the coffee. So there's one particular honey process that has virtually none of the mucilage left on it.
Oh,
it's only a small amount.
Yeah.
And there's one that's got most of the mucilage on it, but not the skin. So there's different processes with different to sort of do different amounts. It's controlling the amount of sort of naturalness
in it,
from the process that you're getting with the coffee.
And I think that's what I found when I had my last honey coffee, which I think was an ozone.
Okay.
I found that it was like a natural missing all the unusual flavours. It was a very unsatisfactory experience.
So I think it might have been one of the honey processes that, like, maybe I think there's one called white honey.
Okay.
I forget the exact terminology now.
Seems like a way of just controlling, about making natural coffees more palatable to a traditional sort of washed audience or consumer, I guess.
I think it's also there's a bit of sort of branding going on there. I think it's like a way of. I think it was. I remember the first ones I tasted were tasting a cupping with Origin in Bristol many years ago, and we tasted various levels of honey processed coffees, and nearly everyone preferred the one that was almost a full natural.
Full natural, of course.
Yeah. So.
I mean, because from what I can see, Gardelli don't tend to make a big deal about what their process is, unlike other coffees, which I think is quite nice.
It's on there, but I think it's it's not the main thing.
It's not brand. It's not pushed into your face.
Yeah, not pushed into the front.
No.
So this one, when you smell, when we smelled it earlier, it's that. I was trying to think what the flavour was. But it's very much like Black Forest Gatto. It's got that kind of sort of Black Forest Gatto kind of feel to it.
I mean, for me, I'm getting sort of hazelnuts, pecans, traditional sort of dark chocolate note as well.
Yeah.
It's like I can understand why the connection to cake is there.
Yeah.
A cake, a slice of Black Gatto.
Yeah, because it's got that chocolate.
Well
it's got that chocolate. It's got a bit like that cherry-ish thing in it. Of course, that's one of the things with tasting notes. When you get, as I said earlier to you before we were filming, in my coffee shop, if I put tasting notes in like Black Forest Gatto on a coffee, people go, "Yeah, I'm going to buy that straight away."
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. And then if they couldn't taste that there because the person doing the tasting notes have basically invented it for marketing purposes,
absolutely,
more than anything else, they just think, "Oh, I haven't got a good enough palate." So. I think tasting notes sometimes are a bit too much of a marketing. I know Maxwell Clone-Dash has been talking about this in his video blogs lately.
They can be very misleading, can't they?
Yeah, they can be misleading.
Yeah.
And I think you have to make your own mind up about what the coffee tastes like. These are just a guide. I wouldn't always buy coffee based on
tasting notes.
Tasting notes, definitely not, because I think they're just not accurate enough.
No.
And there's so many variables that can change things.
Of course. I mean, ultimately, for me, I think it's about the texture and how acidic or bitter it is. And I think those are the sort of things that someone can tell, not necessarily by aroma, but by only by tasting it, right? It needs to be properly extracted as well. So,
when you think about it, you don't buy a bottle of wine unless it's something really cheap and have tasting notes on it. You don't buy a bottle of Chateau Latour and it says expect. You might see a review of it where a wine connoisseur said this has got notes of blah blah blah, but it never says it on the bottle itself. And you've got far more variables with coffee than wine, because you've got the product here, you've got the beans, you've got the roasters changed an amount of the beans. You've got then you've got when you take it to your machine or your process of filter coffee. You've got your grinder. You've got how you set your grinder, your fineness, your water. The temperature of your water, all these things can alter the flavour significantly.
Every single step, like you can say, makes a big difference, doesn't it? And it's funny, isn't it? Because it's almost like every single step it removes. It's a step away from the note that you smell when you're actually smelling the bag. with the beans unroasted. Unground rather.
Yeah.
So even the smell of the bag is never a good indication, really. I guess it's an indication of some quality level.
Yeah. I think you can kind of chase that flavour sometimes.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting that flavour that you think you can smell in there, then maybe you're not grinding fine enough, or you're grinding too fine and you're over extracting, or your water's not the right temperature, or all these things. You can kind of chase some of those flavours, I think. Because it'll give you an idea of what it's supposed to taste like. So let's have a...
Ready to taste this now?
I think it's
good temperature.
Okay, so I'm getting that full cherry Black Forest Gatto chocolatey, a bit of dark chocolate.
It's absolutely delicious. I mean, for me, that's probably the most acidic one we've had yet. it's a very sort of thick
Yeah.
initial tasting note.
Mm.
Almost no bitterness.
Yeah, it's very sweet.
Yeah,
It's really sweet, actually.
very sweet.
Yeah.
It's almost like a fruit juice, actually. In a way,
Yeah.
it's sort of like a dark fruit juice.
Yeah.
There's definitely like a sort of like marzipan-y note near the start,
Yeah.
right, which I'm getting.
You get that a lot with specialty coffee, don't you? That marzipan
that's
flavour.
right, yeah.
It comes out in espresso maybe a little bit more, but it's like that almondy sort of.
Almondy, that's right.
Yeah.
It has to be properly made, otherwise you don't get it. Because I
Yeah.
feel normally, and if it's not properly brewed, and you're not using the proper technique, you normally just get either bitter or no flavour.
Yeah.
You get a sort of single taste experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas there are sort of three clear, distinct stages to
Yeah.
all three of these ones that you've brewed.
How do you feel about that compared to these other two?
I would say that's probably my second favourite if I had to rank them.
So you go with this one first.
I would go with that one.
Yeah.
I mean, all three are remarkably different tasting experiences.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's really struck me. Because I'm not actually a filter coffee drinker traditionally. I'm an espresso with sort of...
Yeah,
milk
you're
on it.
like oat milk in
Oat
a
milk,
sort of
that's right,
espresso,
yeah.
or a oat milk in a sort of strong AeroPress.
That's correct, yes. So to have it this way is it's sort of an eye-opener in a way.
Yeah.
So I know to a lot of people this is the proper way to drink coffee, isn't it? Filters generally considered to be...
Yeah. I mean, some people might cup the coffee. We could have done that. But I don't think you get the full experience when you cup a coffee. I know I'm probably going to get lambasted by people on YouTube for this, but like cupping, it tells you some things about the coffee, and it enables you to consistently judge coffees because you're doing exactly the same thing to them, exactly the same grind, with a very set routine.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it tells you as much as I'd like about how the coffee's going to taste when you're really drinking it as it should be, as a final product. I prefer to drink it as a final product than sort of taste testing it with a spoon. Each just got its own advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I guess that detracts from the experience overall, because coffee ultimately should be about sort of from that first sip to the last sip. There's a whole range of experiences in there, isn't there? So,
I mean, I suppose if we'd been testing 10 coffees, we wouldn't have wanted to make, 10 cups of this, would we? We
probably wouldn't be feeling very good. I don't know.
That would be way past my
You're tasting, but then, I mean, in a serious way or a scientific way, the sort of tasting range of the palate kind of would dissipate by then, I guess, wouldn't it? It was sort of almost like coffee overload.
Yeah. I mean, I've quite a few people I've been with, coffee professionals who do a lot of tasting. I see they spit like wine tasters do, they're spitting into spittoon. But
this is quite. I mean, the more I'm drinking it, the more of a sort of alcohol-y note to it.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's one of the flavour notes of natural coffees, and that kind of booziness often talked about. You don't get it so much in some of these actually, as you did in maybe cheaper natural coffees.
Sure.
Maybe that like really fermenty taste is kind of your old school naturals.
I mean, this is like a Cointreau almost, sort of.
Yeah, it's got that sort of
It's absolutely delicious.
Yeah, in fact, to be honest, I'd say that's probably my pick pound for pound so far. I think that's the best coffee. I think maybe that's slightly superior, but it's a lot more expensive. I think the Mazungo only comes in about £18.
So we're looking at £18.
I think about the same, 17, 16 maybe.
And then for this one,
That's around the 30 mark. So,
right.
I mean, none of them is cheap, but they're
But ultimately, it's about that tasting journey, as we're talking about, through the three levels of flavour, which you're only going to get if you have a high quality bean that's been properly roasted, and
exactly.
then, as you've obviously shown just now, properly brewed.
Yeah. I mean, you get loads of coffees as long as you get your dialing in okay fairly quickly. You get loads of coffees from this. So if you think about, even if you're buying the £30 bag, you're going to get sort of 15 coffees out of it.
I mean, that works out pretty price efficient, cost effective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Compared to sort of going out and
Yeah. You're looking at maybe £2 to £2.50 a coffee. Okay, it's expensive for home use, but you're not going to get that level of coffee in most coffee shops. In fact, I can only think of a handful, certainly in this area, that would serve something that expensive.
That's true, yeah.
As a coffee, and you'd actually pay probably quite a big premium. I know. I I paid $3.50 premium on a coffee the other day to
Gosh, yeah.
which was like double the price of the coffee. So.
Well, these prices are normal at the corporate coffee houses now anyway, which, you know, as you know very well, the beans are nowhere near the level of quality compared to these. You know.
Not at all. Right, so shall we move on to the final coffee?
If I can hack it, because now I'm feeling incredibly caffeinated. That's for sure.
Right, okay, so I like the kind of branding of this one. These very high-end premium rarities.
Sorry, I'm just like, oh!
Yeah.
Hang on.
They come in their own little box, but inside it all is a normal bag.
I'm a big fan of this kind of packaging, because I feel like if you're going to end up spending decent money, you know, you want it to be presented in a certain way, and you know, you can't really beat this kind of presentation.
I think that's nice presentation. I mean,
it's also the colours as well, and it's the material, just even the packaging here, the textured sort of paper.
Yeah.
It's like linen paper on the outside.
Because this was super pricey.
Mm.
And I mean super pricey. I think we're looking... It's a little while ago.
Shall I just take that and kind of...
Yeah. I think it's around... I have a feeling it's around the 50 or 60 quid mark.
Gosh.
So we're talking about something that is not cheap at all.
Cheap.
Yeah, so what we've got here is a geisha. So people pronounce it different ways, but I call it geisha. It's a variety that originated in Ethiopia, wild variety of coffee plant, and it wasn't until it was taken to Panama that it really kind of came into its own. It was grown at high altitude. It produces what's considered to be the best coffee in the world. But
what is it about geishas that gives them this incredibly silky, rounded taste in the mouth? It's just, you know, no other coffee I've had, you know, this La Chora, for instance.
I had it a bit, actually, I have to say. It did, didn't it? It had that...
It's just incredibly silky in the mouth when you kind of drink it. It's so easy to drink.
Yeah.
What is it about the geisha coffees that make them so palatable?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think anyone's really... Have a smell of that. I don't think anyone's really sort of come to any great conclusions about this.
Now, goodness,
I think to remember about this. This is actually a slightly old coffee. This is one we've had for a while.
Unbelievable.
That we brought in, and I think it was actually just too expensive to sell. So it's been sitting around for a few weeks. It's not probably at its best, to be honest. But
I mean, the overwhelming smell note. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but it's just the levels of toffee in there are just incredible.
Right, let's give this a go. So one thing I'd say at this point, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but let's just close that off a second. I'm using about 12 to 13 grams of coffee for my AeroPresses, which you might think is not very much, but that's because with the EK43, our grinder there, you don't need as much as you would with a grinder that's a bit more inconsistent with its particle size. So when I'm using my little home grinder, I've got a little hand grinder at home, which is, you know, 50 quid, whereas that thing's 2,500 quid.
It's the real deal.
Yeah, I dose up a lot more because what you're getting with the EK is you're getting a lot more like extractable material from your coffee, so you can put less in and still get really good tasting coffee. You have to put a bit more in when you're using a home grinder, even if you've got quite a decent home grinder.
Sure.
You probably have to put 15, 16 grams in, because less of that coffee is at exactly the right size.
I see.
So with the EK, lots of it is at exactly the right size. All grinders produce a range of particle sizes. They produce bolters, which are the bigger ones, and fines, which are the very small ones, and then that kind of middle range, which is the thing that's giving you the majority of your extraction. The EK will produce more of that middle range, and the particle size will be closer together.
I see.
So it's a more even extraction, so you can get away with less coffee in there in the first place, and that kind of helps. Now, as this is an older coffee, I'm going to grind it a little bit finer because it would have degassed more. Right, so final coffee.
It's really quite a nice flavour.
It's a geisha.
Yeah. Excited to try this.
It's got that soggy texture.
It's a nice texture, but for me, I'm finding that there's like a slight bitter note in there almost, which the others didn't have.
There's a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit sort of watery, and I think the main reason for that is it's a bit past its best.
So it's aged a bit.
Yeah, unlike wine, coffee doesn't age well. You can taste that kind of peach taste. The texture's lovely. I did try this coffee when it was fresh, a different bag, and it was really, really very good. Whether it was twice as good as this one, no, probably not actually.
It's questionable. I mean, I'm not finding the flavour, the palate on that to be particularly complex either. Is that to do with the age as well?
I think it's just a bit past its best.
Really.
It was always going to be like that, but it's such an expensive coffee that we probably should have just drunk it ourselves earlier on, because
probably
it's a difficult one to sell.
So that fear that we were talking about around brewing an expensive coffee actually ended up costing.
I think that's the case. So to conclude, you're going to take one of these bags home with you. Which one's it going to be?
I think I'm going to go for the Zingu project.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I think
not the La Aurora then.
I think because I don't drink my coffee as a filter traditionally, I like to have it with milk. I have a feeling that the Zingu project with milk will probably be.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there, actually. It's
stretched out pretty well.
It's got a bit more punchiness to it. It'll punch through.
That's
milk.
correct. Yeah. However, if I was just to be drinking purely filter, then I'd probably go for this one without question. Actually.
Yeah. The other question is, how caffeinated do you feel now after 4 coffees in an hour?
I feel like I could probably run to Beckington and back easily.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. I think it's been really good.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me and sharing all your incredible knowledge and seeing you brew the coffee so precisely. I wish I could replicate this at home. So
well, you can. It's just the only thing you always lack at home is the grinder.
The grinder, of course. Yeah.
I did have that grinder in my house at one point, and it nearly ended in divorce because it doesn't look that big here. When you put it into a normal kitchen, it's a complete nightmare. Grounds go everywhere. It's just a disaster. So, but like you can get quite good hand grinders pretty inexpensively these days. Get scales. One of those peat water filters, which we've been using here, which is available from Kelowna and Smalls. Kelowna Coffee. That makes a big difference as well, and then obviously decent coffee, and you're fine.
But if you're looking for a quick divorce, you reckon?
Yeah, I reckon if you look, perfectly. If you spend $2.5 grand worth of your own money on that, and put it in your kitchen, you'll soon be involved in the services of a lawyer.
I see.
Right, that's all from us today. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like, and we'll see you with our next video soon.
Thanks.